The chill of an early autumn night bit through Ilara's thin shawl, settling deep into her bones. She lay huddled in the scratchy hay of a forgotten corner in the cavernous barn, each rustle of unseen creatures in the darkness a fresh spike of fear. The scent of dust, old wood, and the faint, not unpleasant aroma of livestock filled her nostrils, a strange perfume for despair. Only hours ago, it felt like a lifetime, she had been spat out by the train at a whistle-stop town, a place that barely registered on any map she had ever seen. The man, Mr. Albright, who had arranged her passage as a mail-order bride, was supposed to meet her. He never came. Or perhaps the portly, leering man who had eyed her from the platform, his gaze stripping her bare, was the intended, and Albright had simply been the broker of her misery. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She had fled, her small valise clutched in one hand, the other pressing against the frantic bird, that was her heart, until she found this barn, a temporary sanctuary against the vast, uncaring wilderness and the predators, both animal and human, it surely harbored. Hunger was a dull ache now, overshadowed by the sharper pangs of terror, and a loneliness so profound, it felt like a physical weight crushing her chest. Her past was a tapestry of hardship, but this abandonment, this utter desolation, was a new, terrifying shade of bleak. She carried the invisible scars of a life that had offered few kindnesses, and the fresh, raw wound of this latest betrayal made her spirit quail. What little money she possessed had been paid to Albright. She was a ghost in a strange land, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Miles away, yet in a solitude just as profound, Ethan Miller sat at his kitchen table, the single oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the stillness of his home. The farm, once vibrant with the dreams he and Mary had nurtured, now felt like an anchor, dragging him down into an abyss of quiet grief. Mary. Her name was a whisper in the hollow chambers of his heart, a memory of laughter and warmth that the intervening 2 years of silence had failed to entirely extinguish, yet had shrouded in a persistent, aching sorrow. He moved through his days with the mechanical precision of a man who had forgotten joy. His tasks, milking the lone cow, mending fences, turning the earth, performed by rote, a grim testament to survival rather than living. The house was clean, meticulously so, but it was the cleanliness of a mausoleum, not a home. Dust dared not settle where Mary's hand had once so lovingly swept, but life dared not enter either. He ate his meager supper, the food tasteless, his gaze drifting to the empty chair across from him. The fields outside, bathed in the pale moonlight, stretched away, a testament to his labor, but they offered no comfort, no solace. They were just land, demanding and unforgiving, much like the grief that held him captive. He was a man adrift, his purpose lost with the woman who had been his compass, his harbor. The first hint of grey dawn was reluctantly painting the eastern sky when Ethan, lantern in hand, made his way to the barn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of frost and damp earth. His routine was immutable, a metronome against the chaos of his inner world. As he slid open the heavy barn door, a sound, faint but distinct, a rustle of hay that was not a rat, not a stray cat, reached him. He froze, his senses, honed by years on the land, instantly alert. "Who's there?" His voice was raspy from disuse, harsher than he intended. A small gasp, a stifled cry, and then, from the shadowed corner, a figure slowly, hesitantly, rose. It was a woman, small and disheveled, her eyes wide with a terror that struck a strange, dissonant chord within him. She looked like a startled deer, poised for flight, yet trapped. This was Ilara, though he did not yet know her name, her face pale in the lantern light, etched with exhaustion and fear. He saw the tremor in her hands, the way she clutched a threadbare shawl around herself, as if it were her only shield. I mean no harm," she whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with an accent he couldn't quite place. "I was lost, cold." Ethan lowered his lantern slightly, his initial suspicion giving way to a grudging pity. She was young, clearly in distress. He saw the smudged dirt on her cheek, the haunted look that spoke of more than just a night spent in a barn. He wasn't a man given to easy charity. Life had been too hard for that, but something in her utter vulnerability disarmed him. He thought of Mary, of her inherent kindness to all creatures, lost or wounded. "You can't stay here," he said, his tone still gruff, but the edge had softened. He went back to the house, returning minutes later with a hunk of bread and a tin cup of milk. He set them down on a clean patch of straw, a few feet from her. "Eat." She stared at the offering, then at him, her eyes searching his face. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for the bread. As she ate, in small, ravenous bites, a few broken words of her story tumbled out. The failed arrangement, the fear of being found by the man who had paid her passage, or worse, the man she was intended for. "They'll send me back," she choked out, a raw terror in her voice. "To him, I cannot. I will not go back to that." The unspoken horror of what that entailed hung heavy in the air. An idea, stark and sudden, formed in Ethan's mind. It was madness, utter, unadulterated madness. Yet, as he looked at her, at the genuine fear that radiated from her small frame, and felt the familiar emptiness of his own existence, it didn't seem quite so mad. It seemed a solution. A drastic one, perhaps, but a solution nonetheless. "There might be a way," he said, the words surprising himself. "A way to make sure no one can send you anywhere, if you'd trust a stranger, a complete stranger." Her eyes, wide and questioning, fixed on his. "Reverend Josiah," Ethan explained, his voice low and urgent. "He's an old circuit preacher. He's staying at the Henderson place, just a couple of miles from here. Due to leave at sunrise, in this town, an unmarried woman found like this, they'd not be kind, but a wife," he let the implication hang. "He could marry us, before dawn. No one could question it then. You'd be safe, under my name." Elara stared at him, speechless. Marry him, a man she'd known for less than an hour, yet what was her alternative? The man she fled, the leering face at the station, the cold judgment of a world that had already proven itself cruel. This stranger, this gruff, sad-eyed farmer, was offering not just shelter but a shield. It was a desperate gamble, a leap into an even greater unknown, but the alternative was a certainty of horror. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her dirt-stained cheeks as she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The journey to rouse the elderly preacher was a blur. Ethan, grim and determined, Elara, trembling beside him, clutching her small valise. Reverend Josiah, awakened from his sleep, was initially bewildered then, seeing the desperation in Elara's eyes and sensing the quiet resolve in Ethan's, he agreed. Perhaps he saw it as an act of Christian charity, a way to protect a vulnerable soul. The ceremony itself was brief, surreal, conducted in the sparse parlor of Ethan's farmhouse, lit by the flickering flame of a single oil lamp. The preacher's voice, frail but steady, recited the ancient vows. Ethan's responses were low, Elara's barely a breath. Rings were absent, promises exchanged with a solemnity born of dire necessity. As the final words were spoken, and Reverend Josiah pronounced them man and wife, the first pale fingers of dawn were streaking the sky. The preacher, with a weary sigh and a quiet blessing, departed to catch his coach. Ethan and Elara were left standing in the dim light, strangers bound by the most sacred of vows, the ink not yet dry on a future neither had chosen, yet both had accepted. The first day of their peculiar marriage unfolded with an almost unbearable awkwardness. Elara, now Mrs. Ethan Miller, was a ghost in his house, her presence both an intrusion and a strange, unsettling comfort. He showed her to the small spare room at the back of the house, a cold, forgotten space that had probably once been a child's nursery, long before his time. It held a narrow cot and a single faded quilt. "You can stay here," he'd mumbled, not meeting her eyes. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions and unacknowledged fears. The house itself felt like an extension of Ethan's grief. It was clean, yes, but devoid of warmth, of life. Surfaces gleamed dully, but the air was stagnant with sorrow. Ethan resumed his farm chores with a stoic determination, almost as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. Ilara watched him from the kitchen window, her hands twisting in the fabric of her worn skirt. She was his wife, yet she knew nothing of him, save for his name and the unexpected, desperate kindness he had shown her. She began, tentatively, to explore her new domain. The kitchen was functional but cheerless. She found a broom and swept the floor, not because it was particularly dirty, but because the simple, repetitive action was grounding. She discovered a small, neglected kitchen garden behind the house, choked with weeds but showing faint promise. Without a word to Ethan, she began to pull the weeds, her fingers working through the cool earth, finding a strange solace in the task. Trust, if it was to come at all, would be built on the smallest of foundations, in the quiet interstices of their shared silent life. Ethan, for all his gruffness, was not unkind. He made sure there was food for her on the table. Even if he ate little himself, his appetite still lost somewhere in the fog of his bereavement. He'd leave a pail of fresh milk on the porch for her each morning. One chilly evening, Ilara found an extra, warmer blanket folded neatly outside her door. She, in turn, began to impose a gentle order on the neglected corners of the house. A small mason jar with a few late-blooming wildflowers appeared on the kitchen table. The scent of baking bread, a skill she'd learned in a less desperate time, hesitantly began to fill the quiet rooms. Ethan found his work shirts, torn from snagging on wire or branches, mended with neat, almost invisible stitches. He said nothing, but he noticed. He noticed her quiet diligence, the way she moved with a gentle grace despite the hardships etched on her face. He saw the flicker of intelligence in her eyes when she listened, though she rarely spoke. Ilara, too, observed him. She saw the profound sadness that clung to him like a shroud, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. But she also saw the absence of cruelty in his gaze, the fundamental decency that had prompted his rash, protective act. Their conversations were sparse, limited to the necessities of their cohabitation. The chickens need feeding. There's fresh butter in the pantry. Yet, in the shared silences, a fragile understanding began to bloom, an unspoken recognition of each other's burdens. He was her protector, her improbable husband. She wasn't sure what she was to him, but she was no longer entirely alone. Yet, the shadows of their pasts and the harsh realities of their present were never far away. Ilara lived with a constant thrum of anxiety. Every unexpected knock on the door, every unfamiliar face seen from a distance, sent a jolt of fear through her. Nightmares still plagued her sleep, fragmented images of pursuit, of the leering faces she had fled. Ethan would sometimes hear a muffled cry from her room and would lie awake, staring into the darkness, a helpless anger churning within him, anger at the faceless men who had caused her such terror, and anger at his own inability to erase her pain. His own grief, too, remained a steadfast companion. There were days when the weight of Mary's absence was almost unbearable, and he would retreat into a deeper silence, his movements slow, his eyes holding a bleakness that Ilara found herself aching to soothe, though she knew not how. And then there was the town. Willow Creek was small, and secrets, especially ones as startling as Ethan Miller's sudden marriage to a complete stranger, did not remain secret for long. When Ethan went into town for supplies, he faced a barrage of curious stares, hushed whispers, and a few bold, prying questions. He met them all with a stoic, unyielding silence, his face a mask of indifference. But the judgment was palpable, a suffocating blanket of disapproval. Ilara, confined mostly to the farm, dreaded the thought of venturing into Willow Creek, of facing the scrutiny, the condemnation. The shame of her circumstances, the fabricated nature of her marriage, felt like a brand upon her, invisible yet searing. She felt like an imposter, living a borrowed life, always waiting for the inevitable moment when her fragile sanctuary would be shattered. The fragile peace of their carefully constructed existence was shattered one crisp October afternoon. Ethan had ridden into Willow Creek for supplies, leaving Ilara to tend the small flock of chickens and the ever-expanding garden that was now her pride. She was humming softly, a habit she'd rediscovered in the quiet safety of the farm, when she saw a rider approaching along the rutted track that led to their gate. Her heart leaped into her throat. It wasn't Ethan's familiar posture, nor his steady old mare. This man was a stranger, dressed in city clothes that looked out of place against the rustic backdrop, his horse a sleek, impatient bay. As he drew closer, Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her veins. There was something in his sharp, assessing gaze, a predatory stillness that reminded her of the men she had fled. He reined in his horse at the gate, his eyes sweeping over the farmhouse, the barn, lingering on her with an unnerving intensity. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called out, his voice smooth, too smooth. "I'm looking for a man named Ethan Miller, and perhaps a young woman who arrived in these parts recently. Answers to the name of Ilara." Ilara's blood ran cold. This was it. The past had found her. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. "Ethan's not here," she managed, her voice a mere tremor. "Is that so?" The man, who introduced himself as Silas Blackwood, a concerned associate of the gentleman who had arranged her passage, dismounted with an air of proprietary confidence. He had a weasel's face, sharp and cunning. "A pity. I have business with him. And with you, my dear. A simple misunderstanding, I'm sure, that can be rectified. Your sponsor, Mr. Abernathy, is a forgiving man, but he is eager for your arrival." The insinuation in his tone was vile. He was clearly the agent, the purveyor of her misery. Just then, Ethan rode into view, his approach unnoticed by Blackwood, who was too intent on intimidating Ilara. Ethan took in the scene at a glance. Ilara, pale and trembling, the stranger's arrogant posture, the expensive horse. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He dismounted, his movements economical and dangerous. "This is private property," Ethan stated, his voice low and steady, but carrying an unmistakable threat. "State your business and be gone." Blackwood turned, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossing his features. "Ethan Miller, I presume. I am Silas Blackwood. I've come for the girl." "There's been a contractual breach. She belongs with Mr. Abernathy. He even produced a piece of paper, a supposed contract. A simple return, and there'll be no trouble. In fact, a small compensation for your inconvenience." Ethan's gaze was like chips of ice. "Ilara is my wife," he said, each word deliberate and clear. "She belongs nowhere but here, with me. There is no contract that supersedes that. You will leave my property now, and you will not return." The confrontation was a test, stark and unavoidable. Blackwood, accustomed to bullying and intimidation, found himself facing a quiet, unshakable resolve he hadn't anticipated. He saw the way Ethan positioned himself slightly in front of Ilara, a human shield. He saw the unwavering determination in the farmer's eyes. This was not some backwoods yokel easily cowed. Meanwhile, in town, another storm was brewing. Martha Gable, a woman whose piety was matched only by her penchant for malicious gossip, had taken it upon herself to question the legitimacy of Ethan and Ilara's hasty marriage. She whispered in parlors and at the general store, planting seeds of doubt and suspicion about the foreign woman who had ensnared the grieving widower. Her pronouncements carried weight with some of the more self-righteous townsfolk, and the undercurrent of disapproval Ilara had sensed began to coalesce into a more overt hostility. Ethan was now fighting battles on two fronts, the direct threat of Blackwood and the insidious poison of communal judgment. Ilara, witnessing Ethan's staunch defense, felt a flicker of courage ignite within her own fear-stricken heart. That night, she told him more of her story, the true nature of the sponsor she was fleeing, a cruel, debauched man known for his brutality. The telling was painful, but his quiet listening, his unspoken empathy, was a balm to her wounded spirit. He was choosing her, standing for her, against the shadows of her past and the condemnation of their present. The following Sunday, as Ethan and Ilara walked towards the small white church at the edge of Willow Creek, a deliberate act of defiance on Ethan's part, they found their path blocked. Martha Gable, flanked by two of her equally stern-faced companions from the Church Ladies' Guild, stood waiting. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," Gable began, her voice dripping with sanctimony, "we feel it is our Christian duty to express our concerns. This marriage, it was sudden, irregular. And this woman," she gestured towards Ilara with disdain, "her origins are unknown, her character, suspect." Ethan's hand tightened instinctively on Ilara's arm. Before he could speak, Ilara surprised them both. She stepped forward slightly, her head held high, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "My character, madam," she said, her voice clear and steady, though accented, "is my own. My marriage is between my husband, myself, and God, who witnessed our vows administered by Reverend Josiah. It is not for you to judge." A gasp went through Mrs. Gable's small contingent. Ethan looked at Ilara with a mixture of astonishment and profound pride. He then turned his cool gaze upon Mrs. Cleese. "Please, Gable, my wife has spoken. We are here to worship, not to be subjected to your baseless accusations. Step aside." His tone brooked no argument. Defeated by their united front, and perhaps a little stunned by Ilara's quiet dignity, Mrs. Gable and her companions grudgingly parted, their faces tight with displeasure. Inside the church, the sermon seemed to drone on, but for Ethan and Ilara, a significant battle had been won. They had stood together, faced down their accusers, and a new, stronger thread had been woven into the fabric of their unlikely union. Later that week, Silas Blackwood made one final, desperate attempt. He cornered Ethan alone near the grist mill, his earlier smoothness replaced by a snarl. "You'll regret this, farmer. Abernathy has long arms. He'll not forget." Ethan simply looked at him, his silence more potent than any threat. "Tell Abernathy," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm, "that Ilara Miller is under my protection. If he or any of his associates ever trouble her or set foot near my land again, they will deal with me directly. And I assure you, they will regret that." Blackwood, seeing the absolute conviction in Ethan's eyes, a promise of violence held tightly in check, finally seemed to understand. He mounted his horse and rode out of Willow Creek, a defeated man, leaving only the dust of his departure behind. The crucible of these confrontations forged a bond between Ethan and Ilara that was stronger than iron. The shared danger, the public declarations, the quiet moments of mutual support, all had stripped away the remaining layers of their caution and reserve. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil they had endured, they sat before the hearth, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence between them was no longer awkward or strained, but filled with a comfortable understanding. Ilara spoke of her childhood, of the small village she had left behind, of dreams that had turned to dust. Ethan, in turn, found himself speaking of Mary, not with the raw agony of fresh grief, but with a gentle sorrow, sharing memories he had kept locked away for too long. He spoke of his loneliness, of the grey emptiness his life had become before Ilara's unexpected arrival. In sharing their vulnerabilities, their deepest pains and fears, they found a profound intimacy. It was as if the storm outside was purging the last vestiges of their individual isolation. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. "Ilara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, This marriage started as a means to an end, a way to protect you." He looked into her eyes, seeing not the frightened refugee he had found in his barn, but a woman of quiet strength, resilience, and a deep, burgeoning affection that mirrored his own. "It's become more than that for me. Much more." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes. "For me too, Ethan," she whispered. "You showed me kindness when I expected none. You gave me safety when I had lost all hope. You have become everything." That night, the small, cold, spare room remained empty. Ilara moved her few belongings into Ethan's room, a silent acknowledgement of the shift that had occurred between them. Their union, born of desperation and sealed by law, was now consecrated by love, a love that had been slowly, painstakingly cultivated in the harsh soil of their shared hardship. It was a decisive turning point, a commitment not just to survive together, but to build a life, a future, side by side. The shadows of the past might still linger, but they no longer held the power to overwhelm the light that Ethan and Ilara had found in each other. Their house, once a monument to sorrow and solitude, began to feel like a home. With the immediate threats neutralized and their bond deeply solidified, Ethan and Ilara began, with deliberate intent, to forge their new dawn. The farm, which Ethan had tended with a weary sense of duty, now became a shared endeavor, a focus for their hopes. Together, they repaired the old section of the barn roof that had leaked for years, their laughter echoing in the rafters as they worked side by side. Ilara's kitchen garden expanded, its bounty bringing color and flavor to their table and to the small stall she tentatively started at the weekly town market. Her preserved goods and fresh produce slowly winning over even some of the more skeptical townsfolk. Ethan bought a few more head of cattle, his eyes holding a new spark of ambition. The house itself underwent a transformation. Rooms were aired, curtains mended and washed, small touches of warmth and personality emerging, a brightly colored quilt Ilara pieced together, a sturdy bookshelf Ethan built to hold the few treasured volumes they possessed. These tangible steps were more than just improvements. They were affirmations of their commitment to a shared future, bricks and mortar laid upon the foundation of their love. Silas Blackwood never returned. Word eventually trickled back to Willow Creek, months later, that Mr. Abernathy, Ilara's dreaded sponsor, had met an unsavory end in a distant city, his own cruelties catching up with him. The news brought Ilara a quiet, profound relief, the final closing of a terrifying chapter in her life. As for Martha Gable, her campaign of moral righteousness had largely faltered. The sight of Ethan and Ilara working together, their quiet dignity, and the evident, growing happiness between them, had subtly shifted public opinion. Some townsfolk, perhaps ashamed of their earlier judgment or simply won over by Ilara's gentle persistence at the market, began to offer small gestures of acceptance. A friendly nod from the blacksmith, a shared recipe from the baker's wife, an offer of help from a neighboring farmer during a difficult harvest. These were small things, but they signified a thawing of the communal frost. Not everyone in Willow Creek became their friend, of course. Some continued to watch them with suspicion or reserve. But Ethan and Ilara found that they no longer needed the validation of the entire community. Their peace was found within the fences of their farm, within the walls of their home, and most importantly, within each other. They had created their own small, accepting world, a sanctuary built on resilience and mutual devotion. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing Ethan had recently repaired, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Ilara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think," she mused softly, "how strange it all is, how we found each other?" Ethan put his arm around her, drawing her closer. "Strange, perhaps," he conceded, a rare smile touching his lips. "But I wouldn't change a moment of it, not if it led me here, to you." The formal vows they had spoken before dawn so many months ago had been a legal necessity. The unspoken vows they lived each day were a testament to a love that had proven itself true and enduring. 2 springs later, the farm was a symphony of new life. Apple blossoms scented the air, lambs frolicked in the pasture, and the fields Ethan had once tilled with a heavy heart now promised a bountiful harvest. The house, too, echoed with a new kind of vitality. The most precious sound was the gurgling laughter of their infant son, Daniel, a sturdy, bright-eyed baby who had his father's steady gaze and his mother's gentle smile. Ilara, watching Ethan hold their child, his large, calloused hands surprisingly tender, felt a wave of contentment so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. The hollow ache of his past grief for Mary had softened, transformed into a gentle memory that no longer overshadowed the present joy. Mary would have liked Ilara, he often thought. She would have loved Daniel. They had become an accepted, if quiet, part of the Willow Creek community. Their hard work, their decency, and the undeniable strength of their family had earned them a grudging respect that, in some quarters, had blossomed into genuine warmth. They, in turn, offered kindness where they could, remembering their own difficult beginnings. Last winter, when a new immigrant family had arrived in town, destitute and facing a harsh welcome, it was Ethan and Ilara who had quietly offered them shelter in their now-repaired barn and a share of their stores until they could get on their feet. Their farm was no longer just a place of toil. It was a testament to resilience, a small beacon of hope, a legacy of compassion they were building together, for themselves and for their son. One cool evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ethan and Ilara sat on the porch, Daniel sleeping soundly in a cradle beside them. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that speaks volumes of shared history and unspoken understanding. Ilara traced the faint white line of a scar above Ethan's eyebrow, a memento from a long-ago logging accident. He, in turn, gently touched a small, faded mark on her forearm, a relic from a childhood fall she'd once told him about. Their scars, visible and invisible, were part of their story, markers of battles fought, of pain endured, but also of healing found. "We've come a long way," Ilara said softly, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. Ethan nodded, his arm around her, his gaze sweeping over the peaceful expanse of their land. "We have," he agreed, "and we did it together." The desperate, unconventional marriage forged before dawn had been a gamble against fate. But in the quiet sanctuary of their shared life, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the warmth of their love, they knew they had won. Their peace was hard-earned, their happiness a quiet, steady flame, illuminating the path ahead, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, resilience, and the extraordinary connections that can blossom in the most unlikely of circumstances. The silence that followed was filled with the gentle sounds of the evening and the deep, abiding contentment of two souls who had found their harbor.